Hey, how are you?
I'm well, Ashley. How are you?
I'm well. I'm in Maine.
Oh, in Medibumps?
I am.
Oh, good connection then. Thank you. Is this still Elon Musk's doing? Elon Musk's doing?
Yes, you know what? I just realized I actually do think I'm on the what is it? The cell. Sometimes I use the cell tower and sometimes I use the satellite. I think I'm on the satellite right now.
Oh, you technocrats, I can't keep up.
We found some
We've
tadpoles today, bullfrogs. Life is good.
ooh, nice.
Caught some fish.
Yeah, that is the most wonderful lake. I only have a vague but very fond memory of it. We elected not to go to Great Sprucehead Island in Penobscot Bay next week because it's too close to our son's wedding in early September. We want to try to be like,
Yeah,
totally.
but you just had COVID.
Yeah, but my Gail
Good.
didn't get it. I don't understand why she
Oh,
didn't. But she
oh, then
didn't.
she's probably good too. She's got to have good
That's
immunity
what
too.
I thought. But I mean, we missed a family wedding and a not to be repeated other family event this summer because of
Oh,
exposure. So we're taking it easy. Um,
yeah.
anyway,
Wow.
I was advising my one of the guys I would hang out with there about how to increase the cell signal, with a cell signal booster or with a remote
Much
hotspot
better.
or
Yeah.
something like that. But the real gold standard would be to sign up with whatever he calls that business, the
What
low
is it?
altitude satellite business from Musk.
Oh, it's so amazing. It's so nice.
Yeah.
We use it in town too. In Manchester, we have one on our house there too.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and I think they're portable. I think are they? Can you move them around?
Well, so right now they're in a beta phase, and no, they're not allowing it because they only have certain satellites out and they only are allocating to different geographic areas a certain set number. So for now, no. So we got one for up here and one for down there, but at some point, yes, I imagine that it will be mobile.
Yeah, it's all lasers in the jungle to me. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Ashley.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well yourself?
I'm well. I'm in Medibumps, Maine right now.
You know,
Life is good.
I heard Steve talking about Maine, and I'm going to Maine next week.
Oh yeah, where are you headed?
I'm heading up to Camden.
Oh,
Yeah,
all
this
right.
is like adds 3 hours to get to Camden, onward, down
Yeah.
east, all the way to Medibumps.
There's a lot of Maine to go through.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, there's that famous road, that highway, I think it's 15, called the airline, because back
Yeah.
in the day, pilots would follow it.
Right. Oh yeah.
It's
Oh yeah.
almost due east-west, and it's straight as an arrow.
What do they say? You can't get there from here.
Right. Anyway, thank you and Dana for getting that stuff out yesterday. That was
No
really
problem. No problem. And thanks for rearranging the meeting. I know this is a lot to ask people in the waning days of summer to hook up again. We can be we've got a very brief presentation, probably 5 minutes.
excellent.
And Dana and I both have a copy in case she has trouble. She's still trying to
Perfect.
figure out what happened last time, but we'll be ready to
It's water
go and
under
go
the
through it
bridge.
very quickly.
Under the bridge.
for the group.
Yeah, 5 minutes will be perfect. I just checked in with the contaminants team, which is holding a proper open meeting, posted and agended, and they're somehow, hi Sue, they're going to somehow do minutes as well. But
Wow.
they're really moving and
That's
grooving.
great. That's great.
I won't steal any of their thunder, but they've got a brilliant case example of what can happen to contaminant levels when you switch what you're using to treat your roads. And they didn't have to look outside the town boundaries to get this example.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Evening, Ron. And there's Dana.
Hey, Steve. Scott.
Hey, Dana.
Saying thank you for rushing that thing along to us. It's very helpful to have it.
No problem.
Well, I know the contaminants team is coming because they were meeting in full force at 6:30,
Oh.
and they've got a wind at their back or a bit in their teeth or whatever the phrase is.
Steve, as a little bit of an aside on that, I was on the phone with my fellow fire commissioner down here in Katuitt today, and we've requested a history of fires put out with PFAS foam over the last 20 years. And we're going to map it geographically just to see where this has happened and whether or not that could be another source.
Yeah. Are you concerned that the concentration of PFAS is particularly high in that stuff?
Well, we're finding about 8 or 10 parts per trillion, excuse me, which is half of the standards. So we're okay so far, but it's showing up in purely residential areas. So we're scratching our heads, whether it's the cookware or other stuff in our households. And then we thought, geez, maybe there's some firefighting foam that was, distributed. It's a tough one. It's a really tough one to chase.
We may never know it. And,
No, exactly.
A thousand years from now, archaeologists may determine that it was our cats and dogs, who poop outdoors. Or something like that. Something really silly like that.
Right.
And they're
Coating
finding,
on our downspouts.
yeah, they're finding in rainfall, some ambient
Oh, yeah.
rainfall.
Yeah.
Not at very high levels, but it's
Oh.
there.
It's enough to make you suspect like a Russian infrastructure attack. Well, this is good, Sue. We have 5 members present and 3 minutes to go. Gordon, I hope you guys will take, 60 seconds and mention that really interesting finding from Francie. It's we look for object lessons and examples, case studies, and things like that. We don't expect to find them right inside Manchester.
I'd be happy to.
Jessica, are those the Northern Lights?
I have no idea. I just picked a background so you didn't have to see my messy office.
I've just put the Vaseline lens on here.
Yeah, I've done that, but I thought the Northern Lights or whatever it is were kind of fun.
It's much more appealing. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, good. Let's take another count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. One more, I think, tips us into quorum.
We should have our whole group here in just a second, I would think. 'Cause we just topped off the other one.
Steve,
I
if
think
you look under participants, it says there's 15 of us listed.
Oh, well, and I'm only seeing what I.
You're only
signed up
seeing
to see.
what fits on one
Yeah,
screen,
how
I
silly of
think.
me. Thank you. That's why we pay you the big bucks.
I wish.
Yes, there's John Round. And excellent. So I can call this short rerun meeting. It's not a rerun. It's a real meeting of the Manchester Water Resources Protection Task Force under the auspices of the Select Board. And our goal tonight is to hear some succinct updates where necessary and take the necessary votes on proposals and things we want to refer to the Select Board. Anyone else have any announcements before we plunge in?
Nope.
Then first and foremost, we're going to review the revised proposal from Dana Truslow and Scott Horsley, and then take a vote on whether to approve that and send it to the Select Board for their approval. So I'll turn the mic and the screen share over to Dana and Scott. Yep, you can share now.
Okay, great. Well, Dana, why don't you go ahead and share your screen and I'll just make a couple of remarks while you're doing that. We won't take much time here at all.
Sounds
Um,
good.
this proposal is really 3 tasks, and it includes first task of going out and doing reconnaissance and doing some initial testing, and then some additional mapping, and then finally the third task, which I think we're gonna propose not to do until December, is the infrared mapping we talked about the last week. And we apologize for not being able to show a couple images last time, so we'll take no more than 4 minutes here just to show you some of the images we wanted to show you last time in terms of what we plan to do. And I'm going to turn it over to Dana, and we'll just move through this very quickly. Dana, go ahead.
Great. Okay, well, we're just gonna, I'm just gonna go over the scope of work briefly. Here's the project setting, Gravelly Pond. The orange yellow is sand and gravel material that surrounds the pond. Then there are upland hills around the pond. Some of them are bedrock cord, some of them appear to be pure sand and gravel based on the mapping. And then there's several possible inflow areas, and the Hamilton landfill is located here. I mistakenly had it located farther to the northeast when we spoke last time, so I believe this is in the correct position. The numbers that are here are, we'll talk about later, but these are proposed thermal imaging or thermal monitoring points. So the idea was to use field instrumentation to understand where groundwater is flowing into the pond and where we might want to focus activities on further defining how much groundwater is coming in there. And this next slide that I've got was a project that was done by the U.S. Geological Survey in Barnstable to understand groundwater inflow. And they used a similar approach to compare the temperature of the pond water with the subsurface temperature, which they inferred to be groundwater input. And these pinkish purple areas to the northwest of Chevelle Pond had the greatest difference between the pond water and the groundwater. The groundwater was cooler than the pond itself. So this is just to give you an idea of the kind of data that we would be collecting here. Wouldn't be quite as comprehensive as this. We wouldn't totally surround the pond, but we would look at areas that we think are potential inflow areas and just validate that, and then look at some areas where there might not be flow to just make sure that we are reading things properly.
And if I can just jump in for a second, Dana, just to remind the committee, groundwater temperatures stay pretty uniform year round, around 50 degrees, 55 degrees, or 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. Surface water temperatures vary quite a bit. So this time of year, we would expect to see a significant difference between the groundwater, which would be colder. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. This is a study that I've been involved in with the USGS. And you can see the flow arrows. The point here was to determine where is groundwater coming into this pond. And the conclusion is, as Dana just pointed out, that northern area. And this was determined simply by looking at comparing each one of these dots represents a point of measurement, which, as Dana said, this is a lot more than we're going to do, at least during this first round. But each dot represents a sample of the surface water and then a sample at the same point of the groundwater beneath it. So where you see those purplish colors, that's where you got the greatest difference, where in fact the groundwater was colder. Go ahead, Dana, I'm sorry.
Yep, no, that was great to give a little more detail there. This is just a study that I did some years ago in southern New Hampshire, looking at stream temperatures and comparing how much groundwater is coming in from various streams. And this kind of illustrates the same point in that this was measurements over about 4 weeks. And the green line that you see up above, which is quite variable, is the stream temperature that has the most influence from air temperature. So it's extremely variable. It varies as, the day warms and then cools at night. And then this blue line at the bottom, which is nearly straight, is another inflow. And that's primarily groundwater that we're seeing there. It's just a real stable temperature, doesn't really get influenced by air temperature. And that's the kind of difference we're going to be looking for, these, multiple degrees of difference between the two, between the pond and the subsurface. This is yours truly doing these kinds of measurements. It's really just a matter of using a rod with some instrumentation on it. This is a thermocouple, and we measure the pond, or in this case, a stream, and the stream bottom, which would be more of a groundwater influence. So this is just a demonstration of the simplicity of the process, but it can collect some helpful information. And then this is the actual instrumentation that the U.S. Geological Survey used on the pond survey that I showed you before, with more of a handheld probe at the end. And we're going to duplicate this measurement process.
So if I can interrupt for a sec, the detail is helpful, but it's also useful to look at what you're proposing here, because this is really the second task, correct?
Right. So the first task would really be collecting background data, trying to get a better understanding of what the existing conditions are, both groundwater resource conditions and water quality conditions and stressors on the pond. And then also getting a tour of the area and really getting a sense of where our work can take place. And then the second step would be going out and actually completing the work we're demonstrating here.
Yep, and you've suggested a date in the second week of September, pending approval by this task force and the select board
Right.
of the work,
September 14th.
September 14th. And I assume any member of the task force is welcome to check in on site if they like.
Sure. And certainly at the beginning of the task would be great. There may be a point at which we're just going to have to kind of keep moving around, but certainly we'd be happy to answer questions and give you a sense of.
And then the third task you're proposing, which would be a couple of months later in the wintertime, is to use the thermal imaging from drones.
Right.
Correct? Yeah.
That's right. And that would be a matter of just flying and looking at the information real time, comparing that with what was already collected in September. And we're going to have the opposite effect in that the pond temperature should be much cooler, closer to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, almost freezing, whereas the water temperature will be back up to that 50 to 55 degree range.
Groundwater.
It'll be, the groundwater, I'm sorry.
And I assume in that case, you don't have to focus on specific portions of the shoreline or the pond. You can actually do the whole.
Yeah, the idea would be to do the whole thing, right?
Okay. I see some questions. So if you don't mind, let's move to John Round.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So I've got a question about the order of the tasks. Task 2, where you've got these temperature probes. How do you know where to go? It would seem to me that the thermal imaging is going to tell you everything you need to know about the pond and where the differentials or where the temperature is most different, which is the highest probability of where groundwater is feeding in. And then you go to those places.
Good question.
If you're going the other way around, it's kind of like guesswork, and educated guesswork on your part, because this is your business. But I'm just wondering, or is this seasonal driven because you said you're delaying this task 3 to a different season? And is it driven by season rather than, well, you know where I'm going. Tell me.
Yeah, good question. So I think part of there's two real thought process is here. As we get closer, or as we get farther into the fall, there's going to be less of a contrast between the pond temperature and the groundwater. So we may lose that contrast the later we go. So, if we were able to do this work in August, then that might, give us a better result. But also we can really focus in on some places that, from just field experience, we might tend to see the kinds of inputs that we're looking for. So it's really kind of, because we're grading into a season that may not be as helpful in terms of contrast. The ideal time that CEI likes to go is actually in the winter, just before the pond freezes, because they feel that that's the best contrast in temperature. So there are 2 times, and since we're getting out of the ideal time for the summer, that was one of the reasons for the delay.
Okay, so question is, if you could do this project any time of the year, and had your choice of all of the months, would you have reversed those 2 tasks?
I mean, in terms of timeliness, yeah. I mean, if we could have said, yeah, let's go and, right about now, or a little even earlier in August when we had the much warmer weather, that might have been the ideal time. But
But in terms of sequence, Dana, would you have put the drone thermal imaging ahead of the detailed probes or vice versa?
I think that, yeah, I think ideally that putting that before is really helpful, but this is also going to give us good information. So, in a perfect world, it'd be great to get the thermal imaging first.
Okay. That answer your question, John?
Yes.
How about
Yep.
Jeff Goshan?
Hi, I'm wondering what the difference is between groundwater and surface streams, and which of those you'll be measuring.
Groundwater is below the ground. It's in the saturated zone of water, and it extends from several feet below the surface, depending on your location, to, well down into the bedrock. And the surface water is what flows into, what's flowing in the stream. And in a shallow setting, groundwater and surface water do interact quite a bit. But in this case, the groundwater is deeper and it's not subject to as much influence from air temperature, solar radiation, et cetera.
Maybe I'll just
Thanks.
jump in here. We're not going to be measuring any stream temperatures in this case. I think what might have been confusing is Deanna showed a slide that did have some streams in it. In that case, it was a stream versus groundwater analysis. This one is really just the pond versus groundwater analysis. There are a couple small streams here, but I don't think it's our intent to really focus on those as much as it is the reservoir temperature versus the groundwater.
Right.
Great, thank you very much.
Randy, question?
Yes, so I was just wondering if you could speak to what the overall objective of this study is and collecting this information.
Good question.
And what do you
Yes,
expect out of doing this
So
study?
Randy, I'll take a shot at that. I am in the process of preparing an outline, which I've talked to Steve about, which kind of includes the overall approach to mapping. The overall objective is to determine where are the contributing areas to Gravel Pond, meaning where does the water come from? And closely related to that is what are the areas that need to be protected and evaluated and monitored. So that's really the long-term objective. And in addition to this field work that we're proposing, and this one is time sensitive, which is why we're suggesting maybe trying to get out there sooner rather than later because of the seasonal limitations, will be is being coordinated with, as you see here, superficial geologic mapping. In fact, I also am in the process of compiling a series of GIS overlays that include not only what we're seeing here, but some of the information that on the landfill monitoring wells and other data points throughout this region. And we're going to have a composite map of all the various zone 2 areas, watershed areas, where there's existing monitoring wells, such as the landfills, et cetera. So that's in process. And I think this will be combined. They're really different data sets that all go to the same direction.
Mhm.
And frankly, I think it's helpful to have both in-field documentation, which is what we're proposing here, along with, let's say, mapped information, GIS information. So my thought is we should try to get both and compare them, and hopefully they'll be consistent. Meaning, I mean, I would expect to see that you're going to see most of the groundwater contribution from these sand and gravel areas here that we're showing on this map, which is why Dan and I kind of numbered these in terms of priority areas. But until we do the work, we don't know. But I think it just provides, so I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm going on too long here. The simple answer is, the goal is to come up with contributing areas and protection areas, and that would be done by both field work and mapping work.
And it's,
Yeah,
it's
I think that, Scott, that you had also mentioned at some point looking at expanding the Zone B area or having that sort of redefined.
Yes, I did.
Is that part of this
It
study
is,
as well?
it is. And I'd still, that's something we're looking at. In fact, this map kind of shows it. I mean, I'm interested in the connection between Beck's Pond, Round Pond, and Gravelly Pond. I think I talked a little bit about that before. And that's something that we hope to get out and look at a little bit in the field as well during this initial reconnaissance investigation. But yeah, to look at, I mean, what you have right now is a watershed map that we did in 1990, which is, for the time we did it, it was okay, but clearly it's not the best and most accurate determination of what the contributing areas are. So we're really trying to build on that. And yeah, I think we need to think about this. I'll just say this is a complex system because you've got a surface reservoir, you've got a groundwater well next to it that pumps into it. And then you've got groundwater wells in nearby Hamilton that are affecting the flow conditions between these various ponds. We do have some good mapping of some of this in Hamilton, which we expect to integrate into the work here from Manchester.
Scott,
But,
I need to cut
I'm
you
sorry.
off because we're getting into detail. And for what it's worth, if someone on the select board other than John or Ann asks you, why should we spend this money? It's core to the mission that we're trying to serve here. This is our primary water supply, and these facts are determinative of its quantity and quality over the next decades. So we need to know where the water is coming from, what potential threats there are existing or in the future to this crucial water supply. Ron, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. When you say protect the land, if you find out, I assume these tributaries, these underground can come from anywhere. Isn't the land in Hamilton, and can we protect the land in Hamilton? Is that our jurisdiction?
Well, we own a good deal of the land, subject to easements for roadways and whatnot. I think about 200 odd acres, including the ponds. So that we can certainly protect, and we can make arguments such as we've been doing with the Conservation Commission in Hamilton and the Planning Board as they consider that major development just off the map in the upper left corner, about the potential impact on the watershed and therefore on our key reservoir.
And Steve, I'll just jump in. I know you don't want me to get into the weeds here. We don't want to take the time, but this strikes me. This is a great question because looking at this map, you can see the 3 town boundaries. Most of the map is in Hamilton. And to go to Hamilton and ask for and develop their cooperation, the more data we have, convincing them we know what's going on, the better we're going to be off, is my theory.
Yep. And again, lots of detail available. If you look at the recent report 2 weeks ago of the WMA grant that Hamilton got to study alternatives for their future water supply, pretty much ruling us out as a partner for them, but certainly not ruling out the possibility that they would have to use this watershed themselves. Gordon, you have we'll take one more and it's you.
Thanks. So I had a question, just, I think we touched on this last time, but I wasn't so clear on it. How does our current drought situation impact anything you would find by doing these measurements now? Might you need several visits to get a good sense of this? Is it possible that the sources change depending on the level of the pond? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's going to have a significant effect. I mean, I suspect Gravelly Pond levels are down a little bit compared to where they normally are because of that. And that would probably increase the groundwater discharge to the pond somewhat because you have more of a gradient. So we might see a little bit more groundwater discharge than, say, average conditions would be one of my theories. But again, until we collect the data, I don't think we really know. It's a good question. I don't know, Dana, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree on the groundwater discharge. This time of year, quite often streams are quite low, and it is the groundwater that's primarily feeding the streams when you see surface water, unless you've had a recent storm. So the groundwater is not going to change in its location. It may be a little deeper, but we should still be able to get to that information because we're going to be very close to the edge of the pond and we'll be just below the surface. So I don't think in this situation that the drought is going to impact the study.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I have a final question, which is particularly on the northern end of the pond. There's a significant amount of water coming in from the pumping of the round pond wells. Goes into that tiny little dot you can see just above the 4 with the question mark. It's a settling pond. And from that, there's a topping, an overflow that goes directly into Gravelly.
So here at this point here?
Yes. Will that affect your thermal measurements?
It will, no doubt. We need to take that into account
Yeah, definitely.
because we're pumping groundwater, which would be colder.
We
Correct.
could shut it off, though.
I'm sorry?
Was that Nate?
No, that was Jeff. We
Ah.
could actually shut that off if we wanted to for an overhead imaging.
Steve, I see Nate has his hand up too.
Yes, Nate, please.
Yeah, so like Jeff said, we could turn off the round pond well for that given period, but that doesn't stop the flow from the from the settling pond. I think there still would be a bit if there's any upwelling there. But yeah, generally we could, and it might work out timing wise because we are running it intermittently right now to keep the well at a safe level for pumping. So we could try to coordinate that with your field exercise.
And I should mention, Nate has kindly offered a Zoom discussion on the 7th of September, a week in advance of the field trip, to have these kind of discussions about planning the field trip and what we might want to do and not want to do during that first day.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments from the task force? Well, may I hear a motion
Sorry,
to? Yes, go ahead, Gordon.
I don't want to derail us, but it seemed to me like there was also sort of a connection down below the 4 that goes from Gravelly Pond over to Round Pond. When the level is higher, there's some kind of spillway or something. Is that a decent place to measure?
So here?
Yeah, maybe a little higher than that. I'm not sure
Just
exactly.
above the narrow,
Yeah,
the waist,
fine.
just above that,
Up
right
here?
there.
Okay.
It's a concrete structure that separates the two and requires a lift of about 4 feet above their current level to get over. So I've never seen it topped.
Just felt to me like maybe water would naturally kind of flowing from Gravelly to Round in that area, and maybe
Yeah.
measuring it would be interesting, but
Yeah.
just a thought.
And I'll just mention quickly, this is a reconnaissance, meaning first cut field trip to go there. And neither Dana and I have been there. So one of our goals is to learn more about how the system operates, and we'll discuss that, I'm sure, on the 7th with Nate as well. And I've been reading a lot of reports that he's sent me. But I think those kind of things, I'm glad you pointed that out, are the kind of things we will want to try to go see and learn more about this. This would not be, just to be clear, we're not proposing this as the final field investigation upon
Right.
which we will base our final recommendations of what to protect. This is really the starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. These points were just chosen, the 1, 2, 3, 4 that you see there, just on where, natural inputs look like they might be occurring, but I think there's a lot to learn about, the other man-made influences that we will have to understand before a final program is planned.
Well, in terms of recent history, which is all I'm aware of, where you put the 4 with the question mark, I think is a more likely surface hydrological connection in high water conditions, because the 2 ponds are, there's very little up gradient between the 2 ponds where the 4 is. And that may have been the case where the structure is, but the structure clearly changed now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good comments. John, you want to have the last word?
Yeah, just one question with regard to these 4 spots. So if in the thermal imaging, it tells you something that maybe we should look in this place and we didn't look in this place before, will you go back and look in that place?
Yeah, I think what we find in this first round's very much going to inform future work, whether it be field work or research on past studies, etc. So we may very well return to some of these locations during another season.
Oh, well, okay, because the season's too late. I mean, if in task 2, you measure, you do your measurement with your temperature probes in certain spots based on your educated guesses. And if thermal tells you something that you hadn't anticipated, I guess it's too late in the season to go back there and say at December. And
well, no,
that.
actually, the 2 best times to do this are summer, which is where we're kind of in now, and then winter before it freezes. So really, it's July, August, or late December are the best times. So
okay, all right. So
it is possible that when we come back to do the imaging with the drone, we could couple that with further field investigations at that point if we feel it's worthwhile.
okay, well that's my question. The scope of work, you will find out what you need to find out, and if you have to go back to look at a couple of other spots based on the thermal imaging, you will do so.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, may I hear a motion to approve this proposal with whatever terms and amendments someone wants to make, and to refer it up to the select board at their next meeting?
So moved.
Okay, just for the record, I'll stop this screen share and put on the crux of the proposal from Dana, which is these 3 tasks. Can you see this now on the screen? With this timing, 2 in September, 1 in late December or early January, and with these not to exceed or proposed budgets. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jessica. Moved and seconded. Since this is a Zoom session, I should call the roll. And or Sue, can you do that? I'm sure I'll be calling some names that are alternates or something else. Do you have that proper list in front of you?
Can get it. Hang on a sec.
Okay.
Could you do a poll to save time, maybe?
I don't think that's kosher and open meeting law, but I'd love to. I can start. I know, Ron, you are a member of the task force. How do you vote? Ron Mastro Giacomo, still here? Perhaps that's a yes, I don't know. Ashley?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. Ashley,
In favor.
good. Jessica,
Yes.
Gordon,
Yes.
Jeff Koshand?
Jeff
Yes.
Koshand, yes.
Yes.
David
Peter-
Lumsden,
Yes.
ahead.
John Round?
Yes,
We don't have Peter Colarusso or Mike Carvalho, correct?
correct,
Tom Keough is not here, correct?
correct.
And Ron Parker?
No?
So it would just be Helen and Olga.
Okay, Olga Hayes,
Aye, but I'm an alternate.
right, but I think you're standing in here for,
No, Helen's on.
oh, Helen's on, sorry.
Yes.
Helen Bethel,
Yes.
she votes yes, so, and the chair votes yes, so it is unanimous. Thank you, one and all.
Great, thank you.
Next item on our agenda is any comments or reactions to the preliminary findings on water usage, the 10 years of drinking water usage, before I move to send that along to the select board for their review. I will add one potentially important thing. I reviewed them with Eli Bowling, who was the original author in 2017 or 18 of that analysis. And he seconded or reconfirmed everything, but he made an important point, which is the first number that's revealed in those findings is that Manchester is using about 78 gallons per person per day on average over the last 10 years, which is significantly above the 65 gallons per day standard or upper target that the state has set, whereas all of our neighbors are below that, neighboring towns. Eli made the excellent point that number is a misleading average, and that the bottom 50% of accounts in terms of using the least water, in fact, average 26 gallons per person per day. The top 50 average 126 gallons per person per day, and on up the chain. If you went to the top 10%, you'd be over 300 gallons per person per day. So as with other aspects of the analysis, you kind of have to look at all 3 points at the same time. We use a lot of water, and it's very seasonally skewed, and it's also skewed by heavy versus light users. Any comments or questions, John?
yeah, just a couple. The slides that you sent out, of course, said to be continued. And at the meeting last week, you did add probably 3 or 4 slides, which I found very interesting. Will they be part of this presentation?
Yes, I think they should, since I showed them in the informational meeting. So I'll append those, and that's the document we'll circulate up to you folks and up to the select board. And the Cricket has asked for a copy of it, which I think is legitimate, considering it's been in what we hoped was a public meeting.
Okay, all right, that's good. The second question that I have or comment is your second slide, which really provided the 3 takeaway messages. The third message was Manchester's water usage differs greatly from season to season, with summer months sporting vastly larger water usage than winter months due to extensive use of water for irrigation. I think we might work into that we are, that we consume a much greater, the variance for Manchester is much greater than our neighboring towns. In fact, double, seasonally speaking.
Yep.
So The other towns are up 30 to 40% in the summer. We're up 60 to 80%.
No, we're up 112%.
All right, I stand corrected. We're up a lot.
We, one of the first things I learned, I think it was Chuck Dam, who said, you know, we kind of stick out like a sore thumb in terms of summer usage. That's
Yeah.
kind of a great thing because it generates a lot of revenue.
Well, I think that's a comment that is worth putting into those 3 topic sentences or comments.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I like your idea that in addition to just confirming these, which are 4-year-old or 5-year-old conclusions from Eli, we should elaborate them.
Yep.
Jessica.
I had sent you a couple of questions when you sent that out. And I
Yes.
was wondering about the summer usage. I was wondering if, you know, if this is truly just residential, like, does this, I'm assuming and hoping this doesn't factor in the bathhouse at Singing Beach or the bathroom at Tux
Right.
Point, because that would obviously skew the numbers
Yep,
substantially.
there's no accounts that are town, nonprofit, commercial, or governmental, like the post office in this. The gray area, of course, is multi-family dwellings, which are kind of like businesses because they have tenants, and in most cases, they're treated as a single account and metered that way, and therefore they're paying right now a slightly higher rate than they would if they were metered individually.
Right, and if you had one of these like bigger estates that maybe has 2 or 3 sort of homes on the property, do they always get sort of separate metered, or, you know, does that count as one account, which would obviously skew that even if they
Yeah.
weren't doing a lot of
It's-
watering?
It's difficult to generalize, but for simplicity, this analysis treats them as one account. So if we're talking about somebody who lives at 1 Masconomo, any buildings, any structures on that and that are metered on that property are rolled up into the 1 Masconomo account.
Right.
So if there's a accessory dwelling unit or a separate house, a lot of this is historical because those properties had more extensive private distribution systems connected to the water main. And as Chuck has pointed out, part of that history includes, you know, not all of those branches are necessarily metered originally. So the meter may be for the main house, but not for the other branches. There's a lot of room for ambiguity in it, but to make it simple, there aren't any commercial or governmental
Okay.
facilities in it. That was a good question. Anybody else? And you may have had others, Jessica. I didn't mean to stop there. No, good. All right, so I'd move that we vote because of keeping things very clear for the select board that we'd like the select board to review these results, that they're worthwhile preliminary findings, and we want to send them along. Will someone second that?
I second that.
Thank you, John. And now, Sue, you're in a position to call the roll for ayes and noes.
I am.
Thank you.
Steve, how do you vote?
Yes.
John Round, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ron Master Giacomo, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ashley Oakes, how do you vote?
Yes.
David Lumsden,
Yes.
Jessica Lamont,
Yes.
Helen Bethel,
Yes.
Jeff Koshand,
Yes.
and Gordon Turner.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you. Another unanimous, so declared. The next item on our agenda is how to hold working group meetings that comply with open meeting law. We got an object lesson in that just before we met, in that Jessica's team 4 on contaminants held a properly agended and noticed public meeting on the Zoom, another Zoom platform the town owns. How did that work, folks?
It worked fine. It's just sometimes hard to, if you're trying to schedule anything in a hurry, to get it done on time. But other than that, it was fine.
And you understand that you need to provide succinct minutes in the form of somebody's notes.
Yep.
Great. So we had talked about setting up, you know, a reminder toward the end of each week that any working group that wants time in the following week could apply for it, knowing that the announcement has to go up 48 hours in terms of business days, I guess, 48 hours before the meeting is held. And we also talked about perhaps just putting in a raft of meetings most weeks, say 3 slots, that could be taken by any working team with proper notice and minutes. It doesn't necessarily make things any more spontaneous because the 48-hour rule still applies at the front end. And none of this deals with the issue of private emails, which baffles me. So that's there. I've told you 110% of what I know about this. Anybody have an idea for solving it?
Steve, who made the ruling on this, that this needs to apply to open meeting laws? Who's determined that?
It was a town clerk.
The town
in
clerk,
Wisconsin.
but I mean.
Yeah, it was
do we-
Diane, and she checked with the Attorney General's office, so she has it on high authority. Helen, your hand is up, but I suspect it's a leftover, but go ahead. Helen, did you have a thought about this?
Not really, no, sorry, I left my hand up.
Can I
Fair enough.
ask, I'm wondering if Ron on the planning board, if they've always done it this way for the subgroups for the planning board.
We formed subcommittees and we have had postings.
That's the way, yep.
Okay. What do you do about email communication on those subgroups?
Well, we email that we're going to meet, and then we meet, and then we, like Jessica, we take notes and post the notes in a minute.
Fair enough. Yeah, the dividing line is kind of gray to me. It's deliberation, which includes expressing an opinion. I mean, what happens if you share the latest article from the Boston Globe about a breakthrough in the chemical destruction of PFAS, etc.
Well, as
Well,
long as you're not deliberating, I think it's fine. I mean, if you're passing information, I don't see what the issue is. You know.
Yeah, I didn't either.
If you're
But
not deliberating, I think you're okay.
I guess the town clerk's message to us is that we should err very much on the safe side of this question, lest, you know, somebody come in unhappy with some outcome a year from now and complain about our lax processes about open meeting. I guess for now, the simplest approach is to ask each working group head or member to get in touch with Sue and, as Jessica did, set up a meeting so they can be properly noticed. And don't worry if we don't hear from you for 2 or 3 weeks, then Sue or I will be reaching out to you to find out when you'd like to meet.
Steve, I just want to chime in here. I am not the person who can set up the Zoom meetings. That definitely has to go through the town clerk. So I can either help with that but I can't actually, like, even the meetings that I schedule for us, I have to go through the town clerk to get a Zoom room.
Is that a legal or a technical?
It's just to keep things as simple as possible. Fewer hands in, fewer cooks kind of thing. If one person, we're less likely to have issues if one person is in charge of all the Zoom rooms.
Yes. Well, that's great. Oh, if we hadn't crashed and burned last week, and if I hadn't had the problem the week before with the Conservation Commission, I would say that system is a good idea.
I mean, if we wanted to set up the what you had suggested before about how we can set up a few recurring meetings. If people can find that there are times that would work on a regular basis, I could work with the town clerk to get those set up, and then people could go through me to say whether or not they were going to use sort of the standing meeting. But I don't know that standing meetings are going to work for people or not. I mean, if there are regular times that people would say, yes, I'd like to have just a regular recurring meeting happen, and then have a really generally, I guess the only issue is that we'd have to change the date for every agenda that got posted with those. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that doesn't make sense anyway. I don't know. There's a lot of logistics around that.
I think the challenge is that it's just the back and forth. You have to get the Zoom, if you're doing it on Zoom, you have to get the room from the town clerk first and then set it up and then insert that into your agenda and then go back to her. So it's just a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
Right.
What about what Jessica and Gordon and team just did, which is to meet before our regularly scheduled task force meeting? How about if we just said that's a predictable time, and we'll reserve all three platforms for that time for 45 minutes before.
Whichever group did that, though, they'd still have to make sure they've submitted their agenda with the Zoom, you know.
Yeah, although I think we can get by with an agenda that says this will be the working team on, for instance, sources and supply, and it will deal with the questions that come up at that meeting. Enough notice so that someone in the public would be able to figure out what's being discussed. These are not meetings where we're going to make recommendations, vote on, you know, ironclad decisions, spend money, raise taxes, none of that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we have low public participation.
Steve, I'm wondering, since it's an administrative thing that we're talking about right now, would this be the kind of thing that we could take onto email and, you know, give people a little bit time to sort of think about what might work and what might not work, and
Sure.
talk via email and
Okay.
not during a meeting?
Good idea. If anybody has any other suggestions, the ones that appeal to me right now are putting standing meetings in before we meet each time, roughly every 3 weeks, and having Sue be
Steve, are you talking about multiple meetings with multiple groups ahead of this meeting? I mean, that's several agendas and several rooms that need to be, you know, secured.
Yep, the town has 3 rooms. I would just say let's commandeer all of them, starting at
8 hours ahead of time.
6 p.m.
And they can't be at the same time because there's Zoom meetings and, oh, good.
Yeah, they can all meet simultaneously as long as the members don't overlap, and they don't. You see a problem with that, Ron?
I would prefer to poll our group and find a mutual time, and then arrange with
Okay.
Buco you know, an agenda and a room and a Zoom meeting. I think that would be better for our group, because we've had trouble getting together because of vacation schedules and other priorities. So.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's leave it there. Are there any other groups that want to give an update? I thought it might be worth just a couple minutes from Jessica and Gordon and company to particularly relate that interesting case example that Francie developed.
I would say I would let Gordon or even Francie do it if she's willing.
Shoot. Go
Sure
ahead.
thing. Francie, would you like me to show the graph first, just to motivate what we were looking at?
Yeah.
Right. Am I allowed to share the screen, Steve?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So here you see a graph that we had presented back in May when we were looking. Actually, this is what we presented back in May when we had been looking at different contaminants and how they're changing over time. And this was for sodium, and you could see in the Lincoln Street well, sodium rate levels were going up pretty substantially in recent years. And to be a little more thorough, our working group had decided, well, we should go back and grab all the other data that is available on the DEP site for within the town boundaries, because there were a few other locations. So we brought those in
And one of them was this Manchester Medical Building up near the 128 interchange on School Street. And you can see that their sodium levels also had gone up quite dramatically and were high for several years, and then suddenly appeared to drop down very, very low. So we thought that was really interesting. And Francie graciously reached out to them and talked to them. Francie, why don't you tell everybody what they told you?
Yes, the facilities administrator there at the medical building said that the DEP had suggested around 2018 that they move from using sodium chloride on their roads in winter to a potassium, she said chloride, but I think it was potassium acetate alternative. And as you see, right away in their wells, which are below the roads there, below the roads, the levels of sodium dropped to almost nothing. And that has continued. And they, even though that doesn't show it
So
exactly.
we've only got like once a year data here.
Oh,
But, yeah.
yes, but the DEP averages that. They've been doing monthly.
Okay.
They do monthly tests. So in other words, it really works. But it's expensive. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I said, it's rare to find a case example that's within the town lines, and there's one. And pertinent because I think their well is large enough to fall under state regulation as a public water source. It's private, but it serves enough people. Anything else? Other teams? All right, please remember that we're looking for goals and timelines because we need to roll those up to the select board. I'd love to get those to the select board when they meet next, which is sometime in the first full week of September. It's either the 8th or 9th or something. And anybody who needs help getting those nailed down, let me know or let Sue know. Now we have minutes and setting a next meeting date. The date proposed is 3 weeks hence, September 14, which will be the evening of the day of work if this goes ahead, this project with Dana and Scott. Let's just poll the audience here and see if September 14th.
Steve, if
A
I
good
could just
day,
jump, if I could just jump in, it's unlikely we'll have results the evening on the 14th. So if you
No,
want to push it back a week, we might be able to present some preliminary, but
Oh, really that fast? Okay. That's
I
the
think,
feeling.
yeah, I think so, but I doubt we'll have them that evening.
Okay, well, I was even going to exempt you guys having, spent the day outdoors waiting around, sticking probes in the earth from having to come to a meeting, but I'm sure you're used to that.
Yeah.
That would be September 21. Which may be a little challenging for me, but I'm not indispensable. How about others?
It's no good for me. It's also a CPC
Okay.
meeting that day.
Let's stick with the 14th.
That's no good for me either, but that's
That's
fine.
no good for you.
But that's
Is it the
okay.
what-
You don't
is it
need,
the what-
I mean, I can have Sarah attend.
Okay. Others have problems with the 14th? Jessica does. All right, let's declare it's sufficient. Any corrections or additions to the minutes from our July meeting, our last meeting? Hearing none, I'll move that we accept the minutes from July 20 as expertly written by Sue. Second?
Second,
I'll simply ask for any member who objects to please indicate. Hearing no objections, it is approved. Any other items not anticipated? that what I blurted out about PFAS, I don't know, many of you, at least 3 of you sent me a link to the Globe or New York Times article about this serendipitous discovery in an academic lab that you can use pretty common, almost household chemicals and a bit of heat and time to completely disassemble PFAS molecules, which up till this point has been a real stumper for contaminant pollution control people. Doesn't say anything about how commercial that could ever be, but it certainly is an interesting finding. And with that, I'll entertain the motion that we all want to hear.
So moved.
David knows what I'm talking about.
What's that? That we're pollution free?
No, it's the motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
I make the motion, we adjourn this meeting.
Thank you. Excellent. Done. Well done, David. Is there a second?
Second.
Good. And hearing no objection, I declare the meeting adjourned at 7:57. Thank you all. Have a good Labor Day.
Thanks.